I know why you guys are here. You want to see me work on the CR250, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to be building up the brakes on this bike, and these aren't just any old brakes. These things are going to be badass, so stay tuned. Alright, here's the load of parts that I'll be installing today. Got the Cerakote brake calipers and master cylinders, looking absolutely amazing. For brake rotors, I'll be using stock ones from a 2017 CR250. Got steel braided brake lines here from Rocky Mountain, Tusk brand, can't wait to try those out. These banjo bolts are from the Hilo Concepts, billet aluminum, looking sweet. Got some more billet aluminum here from Works Connection, master cylinder caps, a rotator clamp, and this is from Rocky Mountain, a brake pedal clevis. So let's get this stuff bolted up. So the first thing I'm going to work on is getting these rear brakes together. The rear caliper just slides onto the swing arm into this groove. And now it's onto the rear master cylinder. Gonna have to find some fresh hardware for this. And luckily I've got this kit from Bolt Motorcycle Hardware. Let's take a look and see if I can find the correct hardware for this. It's gonna be like an Allen head with a shoulder on it. Looks like these two are the right ones. Just gonna double check. The frame fits pretty tight, and there's some threads poking out on the back side. So these ones will work. And for these bolts, you definitely don't want them backing out, so I will be using some medium strength thread locker here. And as always, whenever I'm working with any type of grease or chemical, I prefer to wear gloves, and you guys should probably do the same thing too. Time to bolt this sucker up. Alright, let's get this thing all tricked out. Thanks to all this bling from Works Connection for the cap and Rocky Mountain for the brake clevis. One thing to keep in mind with this brake pedal clevis is where you have it on these threads determines where the brake pedal sits. So if you have that thing threaded all the way up on the threads, the brake pedal tip is going to sit farther down, and then with it threaded all the way down on the threads, obviously the tip is going to be higher up. So I usually go middle of the road, about middle of the threads here. And just so I can pump the pedal and bleed the brakes, I'm going to pop in this brake pedal pivot bolt. And actually what I need to do, let me show you here. What I need to do is replate some of this hardware. It's a little bit corroded, like the linkage bolts, motor mount bolts. I need to pull all that stuff out and replate it. But for now, I'm just gonna have this in here temporarily. All right, so I think this rear brake line and banjo bolt should really top off this brake system, make it look perfect. And with a steel braided line, this is going to make the brakes feel a lot better. No more mushy brakes like you have with the stock line. And all the parts I'm using on this build, I'll have them linked down below in the description. That way you can go pick some up for yourself and support the companies that support what I do. So we've got two different angles on the end of this brake line. This end has a slight bend to it, while this one is straight and has more of an angle downward. So I'm gonna put this end down at the caliper. So pretty simple stuff here. You got one washer on top of the brake line and then one that goes underneath. Just gonna snug this banjo bolt down. Doesn't need to be overly tight. Now up to the master cylinder. This is gonna require some twisting and bending of the line to get it lined up with the cylinder. Just gonna make kind of a loop in the front of the line here, and that should do it. And of course, once I get the guide on the swing arm, that'll help keep that line into place. That is just too badass. Love how that turned out. It's crazy when you envision how something's gonna look when it's all done, and it turns out even better than what you expected, and that's definitely the case with this one. Just love that color combination with the bronze Cerakote. Got the gray on the caliper mount and the little red accents. Way too cool. All right, with the rear brake system finished up, let's move on to the front brakes. So before I mount up the caliper and the master cylinder, or at least the master cylinder, I'm gonna need a set of handlebars on the bike. So I've got my favorite set of bars here, Renthal 999. Gonna pair those up with this Pro Taper oversized bar mount set. So these were sent over by Rocky Mountain. Now for the mounts, it looks like they use OEM style rubber dampers, which I've got over here. So you can see the post is not in the middle of the mount. It's a little off center. So that's so you can move the bars back and forward on the bike and get them exactly where you need them. And how these rubber dampers go is they slide up just like that, one on top. And like I was saying, with the post being off center, I like to run it with the bars farther back, like more in my lap. So I'm gonna put it with the post farther forward, just like that. And then the other rubber damper goes underneath. And in case you guys are wondering, the purpose of these rubber mounts is to decrease the amount of vibration going to your hands. So there's actually no metal to metal contact with the bar mount and the triple clamp. It's all rubber in between. And last up is a washer and locking nut. I'm just gonna snug these up by hand and then tighten them down once I get the handlebars into the mount. This bike's actually starting to take shape a little bit. Gonna get these bars all lined up with the mounts here. Try to get them as close as possible on center. So every handlebar has these markings to align the bars in the center. And it just so works out that with these bars and bar mounts, the end of the marking lines up with the bar mount on either side. So really easy to line them up on this one. Just gonna go ahead and snug these down a little bit so they stay in place. Now this is kind of personal preference, but I like to have my bars perfectly straight up and down. Some people like them rolled back like this. Or if you're a taller dude, some people roll them forward. But for me, I'm pretty much average size, so I go straight up and down with the bars. All right, looks like I got them where I want them. Just gonna snug these down even more. You kind of want to tighten these in an even pattern as well. So you want to have equal gap between the top and bottom mount on either side. Just gonna snug down these bar mounts and we'll be golden. Since these nuts are self-locking, they have like a nylon part on the end of it to hold it in place. You don't really need to crank them down too much. And if you crank on them really hard, you'll actually crush or deform the rubber dampeners inside too. All right guys, I'm gonna get this front master cylinder mounted up and all tricked out with these billet parts. I'm gonna replace this stock rotator clamp with the Works Connection one. And what's nice about this one, it's got a little plastic sleeve. That way when you crash, the master cylinder will just twist out of the way on the handlebar and you won't have as many broken levers and master cylinders with this clamp. And of course, it looks pretty trick too. I think I might as well go ahead and replace these bolts as well. All right, I found some freshies from that bolt hardware kit. Let's get this thing mounted up on the handlebars. This master cylinder looks a little bit different than the stock one. It's because it's from a 2017 CR250. So I found that these master cylinders work a lot better than the stock one that came on this 03. The whole lever and plunger setup is designed a lot better than the older ones. For these rotator clamps that have the plastic sleeve inside, the key is to have them just barely snug. You don't want them too tight or else the master cylinder won't be able to slide or rotate out of the way and prevent from damage. So that's a little bit too loose. Give it a couple more turns here. You should barely be able to move it with your hand. So that looks stable enough to where it's not gonna move during normal use, but say if I lay the bike over, it's gonna still rotate out of the way. And you guys know, there's no way I'm forgetting about this Works Connection cap. Time to get it bolted up. Now that looks pretty sick, but these screws, I am gonna have to find some new ones. And of course, we're gonna top it all off with a billet banjo bolt and a red steel braided brake line. You know what? Since I'm replacing all these master cylinder caps with billet ones from Works Connection, I might as well just go ahead and give away the old ones. So these are Cerakoted actually, and they'll fit pretty much any Honda with hydraulic brakes. So comment down below in the comment section, PRYME, P-R-Y-M-E, if you would like to be in the running to win these. Now for the front brake caliper, this is where it gets tricky, and that's why I saved it for last. So I will be using a 2017 CR250 front rotor, and that's 20 millimeters bigger than the stock rotor. So you can see the CRF rotor is a little bit bigger, and because of that, I'll have to use a different caliper mount. And it would seem like I could just use the caliper mount from the CRF, but that's not quite the case. So the mount on the forks here is a different distance between the CR and the CRF. On this bike, they had kind of a funky sizing here, so I won't be able to use the ones from the CRF, and no one really makes a bracket for a 260 millimeter rotor for a 2002 to 2003 CR250. So I kind of had to improvise here. This bracket's from a 2011 RMZ 450, I believe, and it's a tusk bracket from Rocky Mountain. And this is meant for a 260 millimeter rotor, and somehow, some way, I think this is gonna work. So the mounting holes to mount it to the fork are the same, and now I just need to see if this mount will line up with the CR caliper. Let's cross our fingers here, because if this doesn't work, I will be stuck using this crappy looking rotor, and I really want to use the CRF rotor. It looks so much better. Shouldn't take much to pull this mount off and swap them out. And it looks like I'll need to pull this pin off the old mount as well. Alright guys, here's the moment of truth. See if this works out. Looks like they're lining up. Sweet, that looks like it's gonna work out perfect. But one thing I need to account for, I need to get it mounted up on the bike and see if it actually lines up with a rotor, and everything is good there. I really want to Cerakote this the same color as I had the old bracket. And now I'm down here at the forks. Let's hope this lines up as well. Oh yeah, I think we are good to go. That's a big relief. I'm gonna get this thing tightened down and then throw the wheel on the bike. Make sure the caliper lines up with the rotor. I'll need to get this rotor bolted up. Alright guys, here is the real test. I've got my fingers crossed once again. Let's hope everything lines up a-okay. That looks good so far. Just gonna slide this axle through. Everything's looking good on the other side. Get this thing pushed all the way in. I think we're in business. Sweet. I really don't want to leave this caliper open, so I'm gonna bolt up the brake line and seal things up. With that figured out, I'm gonna pull the caliper mount back off and Cerakote it. And while I'm at it, I might as well Cerakote the brake lever as well. Since the clutch cover will be black, I'll want this black too. So the first step in the Cerakoting process is to sandblast these parts. Damn it. Sandblast these parts in the blast cabinet here, and this allows the ceramic coating to stick that much better. Just finished up with the blasting process, and now you can see these parts have like a gritty texture or a rough finish to them. Something that Cerakote can really adhere to. So now I'm gonna wipe them down with acetone and then pour the acetone into this container and let them soak for 30 minutes before I bake them in the oven. Now that the soaking's all finished up, I'm gonna bake these parts through the oven at 300 degrees for an hour. And what this is gonna do is burn off any remaining oils or contaminants left on the parts. The parts are now out of the oven and ready to spray. So I've got my mini HVLP gun here, For the brake caliper mount, I'll be using this color called tungsten. It's like a grayish color. And then for the brake lever, I'll be using graphite black. And what's cool about Cerakote is most tolerances like threads and mounting surfaces do not need to be masked off like you'd have to do for powder coating. And of course, whenever you're doing any sort of painting, it is definitely recommended to use a respirator and a pair of gloves. And into the oven they go for an hour at 300 degrees. Can't wait to see how these things turn out. Alrighty guys, let's get these front brakes all together. The caliper is all done, and once I get the brake lever mounted up, I'll be able to bleed the brakes and get them working. Okay, now it's on to the last step for the brakes. Gotta fill them up with fluid and bleed them out. So I'll be using this Maxima DOT4 brake fluid along with a 60cc syringe with a hose on the end of it. And what we're gonna do with the syringe is connect the hose to the bleeder valve on the caliper here. It's kind of a tight fit. There we go. And what I'm gonna do is fill the syringe with brake fluid, push the fluid through the caliper, up through the brake line, up to the master cylinder. And this should be a pretty quick and easy way to fill the brakes with fluid without introducing any air into the system. And of course, I'm gonna have to pull the master cylinder cap off. I should have just left it off in the first place. I'll need that cap off to let the air escape and keep an eye on the fluid level. So this is definitely one of the cheaper and easier ways to bleed brakes, since you're pushing the air from the caliper up to the master cylinder instead of trying to push the air from the master cylinder by pumping the lever down to the caliper and fighting against gravity. Okay, enough talking. I'm gonna pull this master cylinder cap off and get the syringe and brake fluid ready to go. Now for the syringe, when I fill it with brake fluid, I need to make sure there's no air inside the syringe or the line. So I'm gonna pull the plunger out of the syringe and then fill it up with brake fluid. So there's gonna be some air trapped here at the top of the syringe. Tilt the syringe and let that air escape out the top. You can see the air bubbles traveling up. This might get a little bit messy here. Now I'm just pushing that plunger up and I need to squeeze all of the air out of the line. It's funny, the reason I know how to do this is because at the hospital I've seen all the nurses tilt the syringe up and then squeeze all the air out. This is for like injections and stuff. One last little air bubble here to squeeze out. All right, now we're all set. There's no air trapped inside this syringe. All right, before we slip that line onto the bleeder valve, I'm gonna install the wrench. And like I was saying, this might get a little messy, so put a little rag underneath where you're working. So hold the syringe with the line facing up and then slip it onto the bleeder valve, trying not to let any air into the system. With the line on the valve, I'm gonna crack that valve open. This will allow the brake fluid to go into the caliper and I can just pump it through. I need to loosen up that valve a little bit more. All right, now that fluid's moving through. So since this is a completely dry system, it's gonna take a bit of fluid to make it up to the master cylinder. And so while I'm pushing this fluid through, it's going to push all the air out of the system and it's gonna go out the master cylinder, and this should completely fill the brake system full of fluid without having any air in there. So you wanna hold constant pressure on the syringe, and when you wanna let it up to go check up at the master cylinder, you'll need to close the valve or close the bleeder screw so that way air doesn't come back out into the syringe. If you have a system that already has fluid in it, like old fluid, you can hook up the syringe just like I've got right here and suck all the old fluid out and then fill the syringe with fresh fluid and pump it back through like I'm doing here. Looks like this hose is coming off of the bleeder screw a little bit, so I'm gonna put a zip tie on there to secure it. I'm gonna go up top and check on that master cylinder. All right, got a good amount of fluid up top here. Let's see if there's much pressure with the lever. It feels pretty good. Could be a little bit firmer. So there might be some air left at the bottom. So what I'm gonna do is pump this lever a few times, hold it, and then while I'm holding it, I'm gonna crack the screw or crack the wrench down here at the bleeder screw. And that should let some air out if there's anything in the system. I've got one hand up here at the lever. I'm gonna pump it a few times, hold pressure, and then crack this wrench, and a little bit of air should come out. Oh yeah, somehow trapped some air in there. Gotta pump this lever back up, hold it, crack that screw again. All right, now we've got only fluid that came out. Just gonna do that one more time and we'll see how that brake lever feels. That lever feels pretty good. Got some solid pressure there. So even with using a syringe, a little bit of air got in the system. So I think starting with a completely dry system like I had here, it's inevitable that you're gonna end up with some air that needs to be worked out. And that was the case with this one. And if you're still struggling to get solid pressure out of the system, take a syringe, suck all the fluid out of the master, and then hook up your syringe to the valve here and push fluid through the system again. Keep filling up that master cylinder and sucking it out. Just go through like 3 or 4 cycles of that, and that should work all the air out of the system. And if you've gone through that and you're still having issues, one thing I've found that works really good is take a zip tie, pull your lever all the way into the bars and zip tie it there overnight. And that should force all the air out of the system through the master cylinder. So I'm pretty happy with how these brakes feel. So I'm gonna top off the master cylinder, throw the cap on, and move on to the rear brake system. Now, before I start with the rear brake system, I'll need to get this badass looking wheel on the bike. So you guys are probably wondering why I don't have a sprocket or axle blocks mounted up. Well, I gotta pull these axles back out along with some of the hardware on the bike to replate them. And I'll be doing that in the next video, so that way I can get everything bolted up permanently. All right, let's get these rear brakes pumped up with fluid. All right, so the process should be the same on the rear brakes. Just gonna walk you through it again. So holding pressure on the syringe, and then I'm gonna crack the bleeder screw. Get that fluid flowing through the system. And for the rear brakes, it's a little easier to watch the level in the master cylinder. So this should be pretty simple. And remember, you gotta hold pressure on the syringe while the bleeder valve is open. The level's coming up. All right, close off the bleeder screw. And I'm gonna check the pressure on the brake pedal. You can see we've got some fluid in the master cylinder, but there isn't much pressure with the brake pedal. And that's because the pads aren't pushed all the way out. The piston is still inside of the caliper. So we're gonna have to push that piston out and get the brake pads in contact with the rotor. And how we're gonna do that is by pumping the pedal, holding it, and then cracking the bleeder screw like we did on the front brakes. All right, after bleeding this thing through a few times, starting to get some pressure at the pedal. I think a few more cracks of the bleeder screw and we'll be good. Just got to keep an eye on that fluid level inside the master cylinder though. With a completely rebuilt system, it's pretty hard to just fill up the whole system and not have any air trapped in there. The syringe definitely helps out. It's a lot quicker than just using the traditional method where you fill it up from the master and try to pump it through to the caliper. This way is definitely a lot easier and less messy. All right, I'm gonna bleed this thing one more time and I'm gonna call it good. I don't see any more air bubbles coming out of that bleeder screw. Just holding pressure on the pedal, crack it, seal it back up, pump the pressure back up, and I think we'll be set. That pedal feels pretty good. Got some solid pressure there. All right, I've got the master cylinder topped off with fluid, cap is bolted back on, and these rear brakes are all finished up. So if you guys would like to try this method of bleeding using a syringe, you can find these syringes at a medical store, farm and feed store, or I put together a few of these kits for you guys over on the website. So you'll get the syringe, the correct hose, zip tie to attach it to the caliper, all put together in one kit so you don't have to go search around and find the right stuff. I'll have them linked down below in the description. Let's take a step back and check this thing out. Man, so trick. I'm in love with how this bike is coming along. I'm an idiot. You know what I just realized as I was emptying the syringe is I can just stick the end of the hose in the brake fluid and then fill up the syringe by pulling out on it. Of course, there's still going to be a little bit of air in there, but I'll show you how I am getting the air out. Once I have it filled up, pull the hose out and tilt it upward. And you can see the air bubbles going up. And you'll just have to flick the hose to get that air bubble to go all the way to the top of the hose. Just about to the top. And there we go. Thanks for watching, everyone. And don't forget to enter the giveaway down in the comments section. And if you need to do some brake bleeding, go pick up a syringe kit. See you guys soon. Keep it prime.